So good morning and welcome. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce and welcome today's Roundtable event, Mapping Your Data Journey from Vision to Impact, hosted by the Social Policy Institute at WashU in partnership with the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, St. Louis Regional Data Alliance, data.org, with some very special guests today from Urban Strategies. So my name is Dan Ferris. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Assistant Dean for Policy Initiatives at the Brown School, and I lead training and education initiatives at the Social Policy Institute. So as we get to know each other in this space and more broadly in this critical work around data in the social sector, we wanted to welcome people into the space with just a little bit of a warm up and a little bit of an engagement just to see who's here. So if you'd be so kind to join us and utilize the chat function and share with us your name, your organization or affiliation, as well as one kind of fun thing. It's not quite breakfast time, it's not quite lunchtime, but if right now you could have any meal that you wanted, any meal at all, what would it be? So we'll give folks a moment to ponder that, to enter into the chat, and we'll move forward with our programming for the morning. Kate, Eggs Benedict, excellent choice, to be sure, going on the breakfast side. Very seasonal, Katie, Thanksgiving sides. Katie, do you have a favorite Thanksgiving side in particular, or just the entire smorgasbord?
Oh, it's gotta be the onion casserole with the green beans.
Very nice, very nice. That is a favorite. Victoria, Thanksgiving as well. Chapin, a man after my own bagel heart. That's so good. Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite New York City bagel?
I have a couple favorite places and a couple different types depending on the mood, Dan. I don't know, maybe today I'll go poppy seed.
Excellent. I'm typically whole wheat everything or whole wheat sesame, scallion cream cheese. Great choices, to be sure. Katie, Colleen, hello. Justin, hi. Liz. Sweet potato pie. It is a very fall-centric. The temperature must be changing or something. It's a very fall-centric group we've got today. Hey, Sarah from Launch Code. The breakfast platter at Morning Glory. I'm gonna have to learn more about this one, but it sounds fantastic. Sweet and spicy potatoes, bacon and eggs from Jeanette. Thanks, Jeanette. Paul with some Neapolitan pizza right out of the, okay, this is great. This is making me hungry. Hungry both for food as well as to talk and learn about data. Completely unrelated, but it's a great segue and way to open up the space today as we get started and jump in. So as folks have now signed in, fantastic to see such a great turnout at our roundtable. We're going to turn things over to Jen Rose Fitzgerald of the Social Policy Institute to introduce and talk just a little bit about the Data Science for Social Impact Initiative. So Jen Rose, take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Jen Rose Fitzgerald. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the program coordinator for training and education initiatives at the Social Policy Institute. And today's event is part of the Data Science for Social Impact Initiative, which is in collaboration with MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth and data.org and the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance. So this initiative, as you know, is focused on building capacity and also just facilitating dialogue among organizations and people who are thinking about how to use data to increase their impact and to promote equitable outcomes in St. Louis. And one of our main objectives is to create a series of free trainings and resources for social sector organizations specifically who are grappling with these questions. So when we started out on this journey, we reviewed a lot of literature and looked at a lot of programs that are focused on data for social good or data for impact, both nationally and locally. We talked to a lot of leaders in the field. And we learned some things. We learned that most of the trainings and resources that are out there, and there are some great ones, but most of them are tailored to aspiring data scientists, focused on building technical skills. Fewer are focused on the non-technical skills that are needed to leverage data to increase impact. That includes the skill of even knowing which technical skills you need. And fewer still have a significant equity component. So to meet the needs of the social sector specifically, we realized we needed to create resources and trainings that meet people where they are on their data journey across many different roles, not just data scientists. We need trainings that incorporate equity across all of the areas and topics, and we need resources that are tailored to the unique experiences and perspectives of the social sector. So how are we going about this? As you can see, this is our trajectory of roundtables. In the spring, we convened 2 roundtables, which many of you attended, titled How Can a Data-Informed Social Sector Amplify Impact in St. Louis? It's a mouthful, but it was a great opportunity to hear from a lot of folks like you, and we asked, what are your goals for building capacity to use data more effectively? Where are you facing challenges? And what kind of tools and resources would be useful to moving you to the next level of where you want to go? And we got some great feedback, which helped to shape this roundtable series, both from participants from the last series and from our advisory committee, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And so one of the topics that really came up at the first round of roundtables was thinking about data-informed decision-making, but specifically through an equity lens. So that is how we got here today. That is where we are today. And the feedback from all of these roundtables will inform the trainings and the resources we are developing for 2022. So I just appreciate you being here and adding your voice to the conversation and letting us know what is needed. Finally, I want to mention and thank our advisory committee members who are providing just such incredible feedback and guidance throughout this process. The advisory committee provides feedback on the content and design of the events. They help to build connections and dialogue among organizations in the region. And they act as accountability partners to make sure that all of the events and materials reflect the priorities that are identified by you, the St. Louis community partners. And so we've already learned so much from our advisory committee and our partners and from participants like you. Speaking of the advisory committee members, we are grateful that several of them are willing to share their expertise with us. So during all of these roundtable events. So special thanks to Urban Strategies, to MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, and data.org for your incredible contributions to today's roundtable. And you'll get to know and hear from additional committee members in the upcoming roundtables and in future offerings. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first presenter, Esther Shin. Esther Shin is president of Urban Strategies, Inc. She leads a team of diverse professionals with expertise in human capital and economic development, serving people in communities across the United States. Esther believes that all residents want safe, vibrant neighborhoods to work, live, and play. Urban Strategies works with public housing authorities, government officials, institutions, foundations, developers, property managers, community members, lots of stakeholders to build comprehensive plans around neighborhood conditions and human service needs. And I know Esther thinks a lot about data, results, impact, and equitable outcomes. So I'm eager to hear from her and learn how Urban Strategies approaches this work. So with that, take it away, Esther.
Thank you, Jen Rose, for that introduction. I'm Esther Shin, president of Urban Strategies. I use she, her pronouns, and it is wonderful to be here with you today. And I'm extremely honored and privileged for this opportunity to share with you what we've been doing around data and equitable data usage as an organization. We are a national nonprofit. Our home base is in St. Louis, and we use housing. We use housing to leverage human capital and social and economic investments in communities. As Jen Rose said, we're really focused on results. So our mission statement is actually framed as a result, and that's all children and families are stable and thriving. And for us, thriving means that families have the ability to choose where they want to live, and it's not hindered by financial capacity. And today I'm going to share with you a framework that we have been using now for about the last 5 years in terms of how we utilize our data, how we look at our data, and that's called Results Count. And Results Count is a framework that was developed by the Annie Casey Foundation. It is one framework of many frameworks. There are others out there that might work best for your organization. So today I'm simply going to share how we use this framework and why it works best for us. And also to share that data is a journey inside of an organization. For the longest time, we tracked and counted what we like to call widgets, bodies. We counted bodies, and we counted the bodies that funders asked us to count, purely because funders asked us to count them. And so we developed our own performance measurement system called Learn, in partnership with Efforts to Outcomes, which is a program out of Social Solutions. And they developed a system for us that tracked the things that we wanted to track. Impact, are we actually making a difference in the lives of the individuals and the families that we serve? And so we connected, and that process took 3 years to develop. So data maturity is a continuum, it's a journey, and in many cases, it's a marathon and not a race. And so this framework really supported our ability to also strengthen the capacity as an organization to be able to analyze data, track data, because the data is only as good as the people entering the data. And we like to say inside of our system that if it's not in Learn, it didn't happen. And that gets to the very first component of the results count frame. These are the 5 components of the most critical components of the framework. And I'm going to focus mostly on the first 4. And the first is being results-based and data-driven. This is important because it helps establish clear targets. It helps you assess where you are in a program or a strategy and change course. And it's really important, given that we are dealing with and supporting families, to be able to change course in real time. Otherwise, change happens. And if you assess your data a year from where you start, dramatic change happens and you might not be able to intervene in a way that's really going to change outcomes for children and families. So in our system, we also use best available data. Not having the data is not necessarily an excuse for us to not be able to assess the conditions of our families. So we use best available data. The data is the data. And before I go into the second component, Dan is going to put up a poll so that I'd like to get a sense of inside your organization, your capacity's ability to disaggregate data by race and ethnicity or gender and other relevant demographic data. And this is connected to the second component of results count that I'd like to get to.
We'll share the results in just a minute, giving folks just another few seconds to read the question and put into the poll. We're about 2/3 participation. We'd love to get just a little bit higher.
Great. And this component, this is the second component of the results count frame, and that is bringing attention to and acting on disparities. And for us, that means that we recognize that race, class, and culture impacts outcomes and opportunities for vulnerable children. So this for us is the difference between strategies that are universal versus strategies that are targeted. And why is this so important? This is important. I'll give you a great example. I have a staff person in our system who used to run the juvenile justice program, the reform program for the state of Kentucky. And they had implemented a youth program to divert youth from incarceration and into diversionary programs. And after a year after implementing this program, the state patted themselves on the back because they had managed to divert 10,000 young people from incarceration into diversionary programs. But turned out of the 10,000 youth, not a single one was a person of color, even though they were overrepresented in the system. That is an example that if you are not disaggregating the data and developing strategies that are targeted towards the population based on things like systemic issues, then you end up actually not helping the individuals that are at the greatest need of being served. Do we have the data, Dan?
Let's do it.
All right, great. So great. It looks like many of your organizations have quite a bit of capacity, which is fantastic. Given that from when we talk about equity inside USI, for us, our results statement, our mission is all. And when we say all, we really mean all. And it's important that in order to get to all, that we are recognizing these issues like race and class and culture, because so many of the populations that we serve have been underserved. And a lot of times strategies have not been targeted in order to really meet their specific and individual needs in order to get to success. Before I go into the next component, I have a second poll question. So on a scale of 1 to 5, what is your organization's capacity to reflect on implicit biases or potential harms that could result from the use of data? And I'll just talk through the third component as Dan gets through the poll. So the third component of the results count frame is using oneself as an instrument of change to move a result. For us, that means that individual leaders can lead from whatever position that they hold. So inside of an organization, it is just as important for my finance team to recognize the biases that show up in this work as it is for the staff that are frontline workers. Because every individual inside of an organization can lead from whatever position they hold. And that goes also for the individuals that we serve in community, residents that we work with, that they as individual leaders can also lead from whatever position they hold. And what's important to us in terms of building the capacity is what we call person role system, and why this is important to be able to lead from whatever position that you hold. For us, person role system is that when I showed up to this conversation today, my 10-year-old self showed up, my 21-year-old self showed up, right? My yesterday self showed up. And to think that I leave all those experiences at the door when I come to this conversation is foolish, because all of those experiences I bring with me. An example is when I was 17 years old and a senior in high school, I had a classmate who called me a derogatory term for Asian people every day for an entire senior academic year. He went on to play for a Big Ten university. I will not name names. And he went on to play for 5 years, and I saw his name on a jersey for 5 years. And even 29 years, 30 years later, I can viscerally feel what that was like. I can't, even though there is no data that shows that university is any more racist than any other university, that the students are racist, I will never root for that school. I'm a huge college basketball fan. When that team comes on, I will never root for them. And I'm a supporter of the Big Ten. That's how experiences show up. And even though there's data that shows otherwise, I have now attached meaning to that university based on a personal experience that's not actually rooted in data. So it's really important for us inside our system to recognize that we bring all of those experiences, because it shows up in role, and that affects how the system shows up. And then in reverse, and we bring mental models to this work. Right? So each one of us, we're looking and ciphering through data, millions and millions of data, and your brain does a wonderful job of filtering it so that your head just doesn't explode, right? How many times have you driven home from work and your brain was on autopilot and you have no idea how you got there? That's how wonderful the brain is. At the same time, your brain's working so quickly, it's filtering through all that information based on your experiences. So oftentimes we're attaching meaning to the things that we observe based on our experiences, which then produce mental models. And a work example is in San Antonio. My colleague Alicia Walters on the call, and she oversaw our San Antonio project. And in San Antonio, we got to the point where out of over 250 families, we only had 8 adults remaining that were unemployed. We could get to 100% adult unemployment if not for 8 individuals, and they were all single mothers. If just simply looking at the data, what was reported was that they were not working because of childcare access. Mental models, staff, right, based on their individual experiences, it would be easy to say, well, they're just lazy and childcare is an excuse, right? So what could happen if that's my mental model? Then I develop a strategy that's not really intended to support those 8 women. Maybe I need to ask different questions. Maybe I need to dig a little deeper rather than having my mental models show up in such a way that could actually be harmful to the individuals that we're serving. And it turned out that these 8 women were victims of sexual assault as children. And if you think about it instinctively, you're handing children off to strangers at a childcare center, early ed center. And these women were really uncomfortable with that. And so they had their own mental models about the childcare system, right? Impeding their ability to be successful. So the strategies then that we developed look different because we asked different questions and doing a deeper analysis so that our own mental models were not getting in the way of developing a strategy that would actually serve families. And this gets at component 4, which is mastering the skills of adaptive leadership. Oftentimes we so quickly want to go to a technical solution when in reality, the solution, the stronger strategy really gets at values, habits, beliefs, and attitudes. Like the San Antonio example that I gave, it would be so easy to look at the data and say, oh, childcare, we just need some more childcare slots. Or we need to send out some flyers encouraging these women to put their children into the childcare system, when in reality, it was an adaptive issue. And so really, really rethinking how we view the technical versus adaptive issues and challenges. Dan, do we have the results of that poll?
We do. I'll share those now.
Great. Now this is a tough one, right? Because there is no tool, right? This is also an adaptive challenge. There's no tool. There's really no toolkit that really challenges biases that we have. This is like an everyday journey and struggle. Right? And asking the right questions and really being cognizant of how, what the narrative that might be going on in your mind and the meaning that you're attaching to data. So data in and of itself is not the end all be all, right? It is also how you're evaluating the data, how you're analyzing that data. And then the 5th component is collaborative leadership. Right? We can't do this work alone. We have other organizations that help keep us in check, also other organizations that share in the accountability of tracking this data, sharing data as well. We just can't do this work alone. So this is the framework that we utilize in order to get to equitable results for all children and families. And, I'm happy to answer any questions related to the frame, but it's one where we've actually, in just using this frame, have seen employment numbers go up by double digits. It really helps to fine tune and focus on the data, disaggregating the data and really getting at the issues that we present ourselves with, oftentimes in role, that sometimes does more damage than good. So thank you for this opportunity to share the framework that we use, and I look forward to the breakout session.
Thank you so much, Esther, for a fantastic presentation. If folks want to use emoji claps or real claps, wherever you might be, I know it's one of the challenges of a virtual environment is finishing a fantastic talk to a Zoom room. So all the appreciation, Esther, for just a fantastic talk. So before we move into breakouts and discussions, we do have another fantastic presentation and some great food for thought around data maturity and data in the social sector. So Chapin Flynn, in addition to, as I learned this morning, being a bagel aficionado, and a self-prescribed data nerd, is a senior advisor and senior vice president of the Center for Inclusive Growth, the philanthropic hub of MasterCard. His responsibilities there include the creation and execution of an integrated data science for social impact strategy, leading the development of a strategy for leveraging MasterCard data products and services for social impact, and advising the Center for Inclusive Growth and MasterCard strategic growth team on the technical and data strategy aspects of data for social good. So a lot of data, a lot of social impact. Chapin, thank you so much for being here this morning, and looking forward to your remarks.
Thanks, Dan. I hope I can live up to the fantastic presentation setup that you gave, as well as now I know we have common bagel interests, so we'll have to get together and have a bagel at some point. Thanks. And as Dan mentioned, I work for the Center for Inclusive Growth, which is MasterCard's primary philanthropic arm. One of the big areas of focus that we have as a center is data for social impact. And we want to figure out how to make that come to life for people. I will say, though, I don't know of a single social impact organization that wakes up every morning and says, geez, I can't wait to do data for social impact. I just don't think that's a realistic approach. I think what people say is, I work for a social impact organization because I want to have an impact. I want to drive impact. And what we've found through several studies over the years is that data really can help to outsize that impact. And that's what I think gets people excited and interested in moving forward with that. And so one of the things we've been talking a lot about is data maturity. And where do social impact organizations fall on a data maturity spectrum? And how do we, for the ones that do decide that they agree that data is a catalyst in helping to achieve outsized impact, how do we help them? How do we guide them? And one of the ways we've done that, and I'll talk a little more about this in just a minute, is through the development of a data maturity assessment tool. And that allows us to figure out where an organization is, so we can be really targeted and prescriptive about our recommendations for moving forward. And so kind of as a setup to that, Dan and Jen Rose were kind enough to create a few poll questions for us, which I think I'd like to introduce that now, and then we'll maybe circle back around to that in just a few minutes. So if we could put that up, that would be great.
Terrific. And so for Chapin's poll questions, we've got a few clustered together. Esther's were one by one. So we'll launch the poll now. We'll give folks just a moment or two to look through and respond, and then we'll discuss further. Apologies to our participants, there isn't an option to live stream the results as they flow in, but if you're reading my face, I'm clearly enjoying watching the trends emerge across the questions, and we'll give folks just another moment or two and then share the results out so we can have some discussion around it. Thanks again.
All right, as folks are wrapping that up, this is my plug for one more plug for if you haven't already answered the poll questions, please do. I'll kind of take us forward a bit in the conversation. And so just a bit of background, we MasterCard and the Center for Inclusive Growth and the Rockefeller Foundation got together over a year ago now, and helped relaunch data.org. So this is my plug. If you haven't already gone to data.org to check out their website and what they're doing some amazing things in the data for social impact space. And Ginger Zielinski, as their chief strategy officer, would have been here presenting had she not had a conflict. And I would say, go check them out as you think about your organization's data maturity journey. But there are a couple components to this that I wanted to chat about. One is, as Esther clearly demonstrated, it's essential that all organizations apply an equity lens when exploring how they're going to use data to achieve impact. And we really believe in a principle that's equity by design. You need to start with it. It needs to be a foundational piece of what you're doing, and it needs to be acknowledged right inside of your data strategy. And as we know, most social impact organizations are kind of on the earlier side of their data journey. However, we're really seeing some very bright spots from both digital native social impact organizations as well as organizations that are transforming how they engage with their constituents. And when we think about data strategy, we want to accentuate that this is not outside of organizational strategy, but rather it's embedded in the entire organizational strategy and all parts of how the organization works. And so when we think about data strategy, we really think about what's your problem statement, and do you know what problem you're trying to solve with data? What data do you need to solve it? What technology and infrastructure are required to access, store, process, and protect the data that's needed? Do you have the people and partnerships in place in order to achieve the target results? And lastly, but maybe one of the most important ones is culture and leadership. Does the leadership team have an interest in and support of data-driven decision-making and how the organization works and their will to invest what it takes to become data-driven? And I think that's broadly sort of how we think about it. And so we challenge data.org and DataKind to come up with a data maturity assessment. The point of which is to let each organization know what their starting point is. If somebody is on the very mature end of the data spectrum, we don't want to be presenting very basic things to them like how to create a data strategy. Who's the first person I should hire? We have totally different questions for those that are on the mature end of the spectrum, or recommendations from those that are on the mature end of the spectrum, from those that are on the slightly less mature end of the spectrum. And so what became really important was to say, let's ground each organization in where they are in their data maturity journey. And once we have that grounding point, we can then provide highly targeted recommendations for evolving along the data maturity spectrum and ultimately outsizing the impact. And so, when folks are just getting started, sometimes they don't even understand how data can help them. What is it? Why can data help me? If I'm dealing with food insecurity and I'm running a food bank, how can data help me put 50% more meals on tables next year for the same cost that I did this year? And then once I've made that acknowledgement, where do I start? Do I hire somebody? Do I contract with somebody? Do I need a policy? Who writes it? All these basic questions that you have at one end of the spectrum. And then as you kind of move along the spectrum, somebody may be saying, well, I've already started my journey. Now what tools should I use? How should I select them? What am I doing to secure my sensitive data? And then later on, it's about optimization and team structure. And I think what we really want to do is say to everybody, we can give you a quick survey that allows you to figure out where you are on this data maturity journey, and then give highly prescriptive recommendations for moving to the next step. And tools, data sources, all kinds of things come out of that. But it only comes out of that once you kind of determine where you are on your data journey, so that we can be very targeted about that approach. And I think this is one of the foundational pieces that data.org is really pouring a lot of energy into right now, because they feel like once everybody's grounded in where they are, there are multiple options for taking it forward, improving the data journey, and ultimately, like I said, outsizing impact. And that's why this data maturity journey is so important. And I think we need to do things still around this, like not use words like data maturity spectrum, because they get very what is that? Why should I do it? We need to be very plain about our language in it, and we're going through a couple iterations for how to improve and hone that now. But the underlying intent is very sound, and I think once we've got adoption around the survey, we will really help at scale social impact organizations transform and achieve their target outcomes. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dan and Jen Rose for the breakout sessions, I believe.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chapin. Not to leave people on the edges of their office chairs or dining room chairs or whatever kind of chair or seat you might be on right now, we are going to share the results of the data maturity poll. Speaking of just plain language, I actually really appreciate how these questions were constructed, not for people to measure their level of data maturity, but to break it down into kind of more digestible chunks. So as we're seeing here, some great clustering around the middle. It looks like more than 2/3 of organizations represented here today don't have an explicit written data strategy, and a couple of other interesting takeaways as I'm scrolling through, which will actually segue really nicely and well into the breakouts to continue the discussion. So Dan, thanks again.
Very quickly on this one. This is actually even a little more mature than I think this curve is. Where the folks that are on this call are a little more, a little farther along their journey and along the spectrum than I think you'll find in the normal distribution curve for social impact organizations, and that's great. That's why you're here in the first place, I'm sure. So this is really good to see. So thank you all for participating.
Echoed, and thank you, Chapin, for the great remarks pointing to the DataKind data.org assessment tool, which is under development. I know there's hopes for that to launch and be available both widely, and then we're of course working with our partners there for some St. Louis potential specific offerings and programming around an assessment tool. So for folks to keep an eye out on for things around that in the weeks and months ahead, to be sure. So all of that said, it is now my pleasure to turn things over to breakouts. So you're here both to hear from local and national experts in the field. Esther, Chapin, thank you again for your fantastic comments. But then, of course, to connect with each other. And so we'll have breakouts of about half an hour. So it's a night. We have 90 minutes total in the session today. 30-minute breakouts. We'll come back. We'll have some great facilitators to help guide through some prompts and some discussion and help to make connections between our participants. And then from there, we'll come back together as a large group and put things forward looking ahead. So with all of that, we will open up breakout rooms and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So yes, I'm eager to hear what some of the conversations look like. I have a couple of prompts here for what you all talked about in the breakouts, but if something else really amazing happened that you want to share, of course, that's great as well. But a couple of things that occurred to me is if there were particular strategies that your group discussed for assessing equitable outcomes or impact, we would love to hear about those. And then also based on your discussions, what skills are people most interested in developing further after thinking about all of the different types of skills and things that are involved in thinking about data for impact and equity? So if anyone would like to jump in, or we can go group by group. First, I will just leave it open and see if an outspoken person would like to start. So everybody is quiet. So I'm wondering if one of the group leaders might want to kick off the conversation or spark something about the conversation that happened in your breakout groups.
Jen Rose, I'm happy to share.
Thank you.
Group one. So there was a lot of conversation around frames 4 and 5, and the areas that folks seem most interested in developing further were around addressing biases and potential harm in data and communicating about data to external stakeholders. There was a robust conversation around how do you move an organization through the data maturity journey when you might not have the buy-in or back-in of leadership. There was talk of individuals being fearful of data if they're not comfortable with either the tech or the language, the lingo, and fearing words like evaluation. So there is also this piece around accountability. If your organization is tracking superficial data because you're afraid of what you might uncover if you dig deeper, that maybe your program's not so great. And then some conversation around the lens in which we're looking at data. Are you picking out data because you want a certain outcome? Or are you actually looking at the data through an equity lens as opposed to one where you're bringing your own biases?
Those are great discussions. I don't know whether I was just reminded of Angela's earlier question in the chat. How much would you say does implicit bias inform decisions on strategies, especially if someone is looking for data to support their bias? And that just resonates with that in terms of, certainly we think about that from an individual perspective, but it sounds like from an organizational perspective, you all were talking a little bit about that. Do we handpick the data to sort of make us look good because there's a lot of pressure to say we are performing? Were there any specific examples about that, or just like an interest in that topic? Because I think that's just so critical.
There were, of partners, right? Partners that organizations have worked with, or data that bubbles up so that certain resources don't get directed to your community because of data that gets culled. So the examples were much more around other organizations. And one point was that we, in some ways, the nonprofit system, we do this to ourselves, right? We're competing for resources. And so you're trying to look good. And so you're in a tough spot, right? When you're trying to survive. And it might be driving you to looking at data and pulling data that's not necessarily getting equitable outcomes, but has you survive.
And I think if I could quickly add onto that, because I think it's all across this sort of like social impact sector. And one of the reasons is because funders oftentimes are the ones who are driving data policy, advertently or not, within social impact organizations, and they're not sort of built into the day-to-day of organizational operations and continuous improvement. And so I think until we figure out how to break that cycle and feedback loop, like Esther was saying, we're going to see a lot of people use data for funding purposes. And those incentives are to make you look good, not necessarily to become more impactful and more equitable over time. Really good questions on who else should drive that data policy, though. So I don't want to say like there is a clear alternative, but I think it's an unintended consequence of where we are today.
I appreciate that. And I don't know, I think you were in a different breakout room, but just to quickly hear from one of the other breakout rooms, somebody in one of the other breakout rooms, does this track with the conversations you all were having, or is there something else that you would like to add to the conversation?
Hey, Jen Rose, I'd be happy to speak up a little bit. Definitely hearing parallels in some of the conversation. There were a couple different topics that we chatted about or had represented in post-its, and certainly one of them was around ensuring that the data that you tell a story with is representing impact, opposed to representing a nice story. And so similar to what Paul was highlighting, data can be used in many ways, and it can say many, many things. And certainly finding that balance between, ethically representing the outcomes that you're, attempting to measure, and also successfully representing them in a story. And so the challenge of that component, specifically something that was called out was the the work that we all know goes into cleaning data and having accurate metrics and having it successfully and efficiently collected.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the storytelling piece is really well taken, because even when we think about data storytelling, which a lot of people express a lot of interest in, and in my experience in past work, particularly in the social sector, storytelling is usually like a feel good activity to show people positive impacts. It has often been that, and not always a place where we challenge ourselves, like, are we telling the right story? So I really appreciate that. Anybody else from group 3 want to chime in? I'm really curious to hear what, regardless of what group you're in, what skills people feel the most interested in developing further. I know that was part of the conversation. And when we looked at the polls that people answered ahead of time, people are really across the spectrum in terms of where you are on your data journey. So
I'll go ahead. I was in group 3, and to add on to Katie's statement about some of the things we discussed, our clients self-report their data, and so I think I would like to sharpen some of our organization's skill around assessing self-reported data for correctness and quality, and not just take it at face value. But that's very hard to do, because then are you saying that you know more than the client knows? And but some kind of mechanism or system to ensure that the information is correct before it's used.
And I think group 2 kind of raised that as well, making sure the data is authentic and actually representative of the population that they're reporting on, and just to make sure that there's a integrity in that data reporting.
did either of the groups talk about, like, what are the biggest challenges of data quality or data integrity that you come across?
I think group 2 kind of hinted at, they didn't necessarily say, but using data to support some of the systems in place that are actually driving inequities, and how do we use the data to make it authentic and more representative of the populations we're serving and that equity we're trying to measure. Group 2, please chime in.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead. No, I was
please
just chiming
go.
in from group 2. Something else that we had talked about was just that related to the authenticity and data is just how to collect it from people. For me, primarily, I work with students, and it's really hard to get information from students in terms of being able to get them to complete surveys or provide feedback. Everyone's very busy, and so sometimes it's hard to really get the information that you're interested in, just because of the dynamic between your population and what you're doing, and maybe your population that you're trying to impact isn't interested in hearing from you. And so how you find ways to get information that you can use to impact and improve situations and in ways that are not just surveys or in ways that will engage the people that you're trying to get the information from.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting theme. Did anybody provide any examples within your groups of strategies that were effective for moving towards equitable outcomes? I was thinking about the examples that Esther gave in the beginning, in terms of, you know, using disaggregated data to really look at disparities, and also to examine, like, challenge one's assumptions on why are we getting the results that we're getting. We might assume it's one thing, but it's another. I just wondered if anybody else shared any examples of how some of those skills have played out.
Group one talked a little bit, or we mentioned kind of through our discussions on the Jamboard, emphasizing qualitative data collection and using qualitative, not just quantitative data to do that. I'm the one who wrote, though, that I feel like I still need a lot of help with really gathering and assessing qualitative data over the short, medium, and long term, right? So what is that data, and what does that look like now versus 6 months from now versus 5 years from now? That's something that I specifically, as far as skill sets, just haven't had as much experience or opportunity. I've been, you know, kind of boxed in by parameters of organizations that I've worked in to really focus more on short and maybe medium term qualitative impact. And so gathering that data has also been kind of restricted at some of those spaces. So those are both things that we said were helpful at creating those equities, but I think also there's a skills gap and organizational support, at least in my experience, for doing just that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I look forward to looking at all of the Jamboards and seeing some of the things that people said, and hopefully, you know, I hope if you think of additional things, please be in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. I know we're sort of at the end of our time, so I want to turn things over to Dan, but I want to thank everyone for being here and participating, and Dan will close us out.
Thanks, Jen Rose. And thank you all so very much to our presenters, our facilitators, our participants, whether you were actively engaged in the conversation, absorbing it all and taking it all in. We're so glad that you're here and grateful for your contributions and your connectedness to the St. Louis social sector and this initiative in particular, as we're really excited about what's still to come. So we like to leave always with things that you can do leaving the space. I know 90 minutes is a long time to be on Zoom, but hopefully you're feeling energized, curious, interested, intrigued, all of the above. So the three things that we point people towards doing coming out of the conversation today to build on the conversations that we're having here, first and foremost, is to bring these conversations back to your organizations. You know, to Chapin's earlier point in regards to the poll results, this group is already skewing a little more advanced in terms of data maturity than the broader population, which is phenomenal, but never a dull moment or never a missed opportunity to catalyze one of these conversations, to take a step back from the day-to-day and think about, you know, data strategy across an organization, internally and externally, centering equity and equitable outcomes. And again, specifically, what tools or resources are missing that would be beneficial that we can partner and help to provide. Also, shameless humble plug for the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance. If you're not already a member of the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance, we strongly encourage you to sign up. You can visit stldata.org. Paul is waving in his rectangle as a humble plug as well. And there's a great community, St. Louis focused organizations and individuals who are committed to the shared vision and value of open data, accessible data, and equitable processes and equitable outcomes. Last but not least, we want to hear from you. So we do have 2 more roundtables that I know many people are already registered for, which is fantastic. We've had hundreds of people registered for this series at large, so we're excited to see familiar faces and bring new people into the fold for the events ahead. And we also would love more context about what your organizations are working through specifically, individually, collectively. So you can, of course, reach out to Jen Rose directly as an immediate point of contact. We'd love to hear your stories, and we'd love both in terms of your successes, your challenges, and your opportunities. So we hope to see you on November 1st and November 19th. November 1st, we'll be joined by some really tremendous colleagues, both at the national and local level, Ali Chang Ray, Amin Ra Mashariki, and Rayed Ghani, to talk about using data to promote equitable outcomes. And then community-centered data practice, data protection, data sharing, and who benefits, being led by Paul Sorensen and other colleagues, which we're really looking forward to as well. So thank you for being here. Recording and slides will be made available in the next couple of days, and we look forward to seeing folks back on November 1st. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.